Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So look, I have a quick confession to make right up front. Whenever I roll out a brand new set of structural blueprints for a project, my brain kind of just short circuits. I mean, you look at this giant, chaotic web of intersecting lines, the numbers, the symbols scattered everywhere, and it just feels like total visual noise. Where are you even supposed to begin?
You know, you are definitely not alone in that. I actually hear that exact same thing from project coordinators and even junior engineers literally all the time. But here is the secret to all of this. Structural blueprints are exactly like geographic maps. Think about it. If you were dropped in the middle of a brand new city, a street map would look completely overwhelming until you actually understood the legend and the local landmarks. Once you know the underlying system, all that visual noise transforms into this beautiful, highly organized set of instructions.
Okay, I really love the map analogy, but right now I still definitely feel like I'm wandering around lost without a compass here. Well, consider me your guide today. We're going to completely demystify these drawings. By treating the blueprint exactly like a map, we can logically break down that complex web of lines step by step. And I promise you, by the end of this, you won't just be looking at random ink on a page, you'll actually be seeing the physical bones of the building before a single shovel hits the dirt.
That sounds like exactly what I need. So what's our game plan? How are we tackling this? We've got a great masterclass lined up. First, we'll establish why blueprints are maps. Then we'll crack the secret code of abbreviations, navigate the grid system, decode structural anatomy, follow the invisible load paths, and finally, connect it all together with the details.
All right, jumping right in. Step 1. Blueprints are just maps, architectural versus structural.
So right out of the gate, what makes a structural drawing so fundamentally different from a regular architectural floor plan? Because to me, I just see lines on both of them.
It's all about the primary focus of the drawing. See, architectural drawings are all about the user experience. They're showing the design intent, the aesthetics, the interior spatial layout, like exactly where the kitchen cabinets go or the precise placement of a window to catch the sunset. Structural drawings, on the other hand, well, they don't really care about how pretty a room is. They care purely about the bones. They show the load-bearing elements, the beams, the columns, the foundations that ensure that the building safely stands up. So if you think of the architectural plan as the skin and the vibe of the place, the structural plan is the absolute skeleton that keeps the whole thing from collapsing.
That makes sense. Okay, moving to step 2, cracking the secret code, looking at title blocks and general notes. Now, I have to admit, I usually skip the text-heavy first pages of a blueprint set and just flip straight to the drawings. It looks like alphabet soup to me anyway.
Oh man, no way. That is a massive pitfall. Those first sheets, which are usually labeled like S001 or S100, are arguably the most important pages in the entire deck. That's exactly where your map's legend lives. Skipping the general notes is literally like trying to bake a cake without checking the recipe temperatures first. You have to think of these abbreviations as your decoder ring. Because drawings are inherently cluttered, engineers use this universal shorthand to save a ton of space. For example, when you visually scan a sheet and spot CL, that just means centerline. AFF means above finished floor. TYP is a huge one. It stands for typical, meaning if you see a spacing rule noted once, you apply it everywhere similar unless they tell you otherwise. And OC means on center, which simply tells you the exact measurement between the center point of one stud or rebar to the next.
Actually, I really cannot stress this golden rule enough. Always read the general notes first. Before a single line is even drawn on the page, this sheet is dictating the absolutely critical rules for the entire project. It's telling you the required compressive strength of the concrete and PSI, the exact grade of steel you have to buy, and the assumed soil bearing capacity for the foundation. If you just skip past it and miss that the concrete needs to be 4,500 PSI instead of 3,000 PSI, well, the entire structure is completely compromised before you even start pouring. Wow, okay, point taken. Do not skip the notes. Got it. So, step 3, navigating the grid system. Okay, so once I actually understand the notes and the legend, I turn the page and see the framing plans. How do I actually locate a specific wall or a single column in this massive building? This is where we go right back to that map analogy. When you look around the perimeter of the drawing, you're going to see a grid system. It's basically like playing Battleship. Step 1, look along the top or bottom for letters, A, B, C. These usually run east to west. Step 2, look along the sides for numbers, 1, 2, 3. These run north to south. Step 3, just pinpoint the intersection. So if an engineer calls you and says there's a clearance issue at column B3, you don't panic. You just trace line B and line 3 until they cross on the page. It is exactly like finding X and Y coordinates on a math graph. Okay, Battleship. I can do that. Let's look at step 4,
decoding structural anatomy, specifically framing and foundation plans.
So let's talk about the specific pieces sitting at those grid intersections. Because I'll look there and see these really confusing callouts like W16 by 40. What could that possibly mean?
Yeah, I know. It looks like a completely random factory serial number, but it's actually an incredibly specific grocery list for the contractor. Let's decode that W16 by 40 steel beam callout together. The W simply tells you the shape. It stands for a wide flange steel beam. The 16 is the nominal depth of the beam in inches, and the 40 is the weight in pounds per linear foot. So instantly, just by reading that little code, you know you are looking for a wide steel beam that is roughly 16 inches tall and weighs exactly 40 pounds for every single foot of its length.
Oh, wow, that actually makes perfect sense. Okay, what about when we're looking at the foundation plans? Because down there, I'll see strings of text like 5#6 at 12 inches OC.
Right. It's just more secret code. So let's translate this recipe too. The 5 means the total quantity of bars you need. The #6 refers to the actual size of the rebar, and that at 12 inches OC, that brings back our abbreviation decoder ring from earlier. It means you space those bars exactly 12 inches apart, on center. So the contractor reads this one line and instantly knows, okay, I need to lay down 5 number 6 rebar rods and space them exactly 12 inches apart from their centers.
It's literally just a set of instructions. Incredible. All right, step 5. Following the load path, tracing the invisible forces. So we have all these separate elements now. We've got beams, concrete slabs, columns. How do they actually work together as a system to keep the whole building from collapsing? Honestly, this is where structural engineering becomes almost poetic. It is all about the load path. The load path is simply the continuous route a force takes through connected elements until it safely dissipates into the ground. The best way to picture it, visually, is to think about rainwater falling onto a house. The water hits the roof, it flows down the slope into the gutters, travels down the downspouts, and empties out into the soil. Structural forces behave exactly the same way. The weight of the roof transfers to the beams transfer that weight to the columns push it down into the foundation, and the foundation spreads it safely into the earth.
I really like that analogy. So, what kind of rain are we talking about here? What forces is this load path actually trying to tame? That's a great question. The load path basically has to handle 4 main types of structural loads. First, you've got dead loads, which is just the incredibly heavy self-weight of the concrete and steel itself. Second are live loads. That's all of us: people, furniture, moving vehicles. Third are environmental loads, like heavy wind, snow piling up, or earthquake tremors. And fourth are dynamic loads, like the constant rhythmic vibration from heavy machinery. The structural engineer's entire job is to make sure there is a clear, totally continuous path for all these forces, so you don't end up with dead ends where stress piles up and snaps a beam.
And you know what's really fascinating? It's how specific environmental loads actually dictate the design itself. Take a look at these UBC 97 seismic codes. Notice how different building systems, like light-framed walls with shear panels compared to concrete shear walls, have completely different R factors, which are response modification factors. When an engineer looks at the historical seismic activity of a certain geographic area, they consult tables exactly like this one. The environmental threat of an earthquake literally dictates whether the blueprint is going to call for a flexible steel moment-resisting frame that can sway or a super-rigid concrete shear wall. The environment, quite literally, shapes the bones. That is so cool. Okay, our final step, Section 6, connecting the details through sections and elevations. We've talked a lot about looking down at the grid from above, but that really only gives me flat locations. During the actual construction, they definitely need to know how tall everything is, right?
Exactly. Remember, a blueprint is trying to communicate 3D information on a 2D piece of paper. That is exactly why we have section cuts and elevation tags. You are going to see abbreviations that act as critical vertical landmarks during the physical build. For instance, TOF marks the top of footing. Moving our way up, BOS marks the bottom of steel, which, by the way, is absolutely crucial to know, so you make sure you have enough clearance for things like chunky air conditioning ducts. Then TOS is the top of steel, and TOC is the finished top of concrete. These markers establish the vertical timeline, all the way from the dirt up to the roof.
And before we wrap, here is a final pro tip on how to read those micro-level execution details, specifically welding symbols. When you see a reference line pointing to a joint, pay really close attention to where the actual instructions are placed. If the symbol is placed below the reference line, you weld on the arrow side, meaning the side the arrow is physically pointing to. But if the symbol is above the line, you weld on the other side of the joint. It is a tiny, tiny visual distinction, but knowing it prevents massive execution errors on the job site. Honestly, it's amazing how logical this all becomes once you just know the language. Looking at it this way, are the best, most complex structures really just a series of well-planned, invisible highways?
I think that brilliantly illustrates the entire concept. Once you crack the code, you understand the abbreviations, the grids, and those invisible load pads, intimidating blueprints completely stop being visual noise. They become these dynamic, beautifully interconnected maps that guide massive, invisible forces safely into the ground. So the next time you roll open a huge set of plans, don't get overwhelmed. Just find your legend, orient your grid, and start reading the map.